Hi everyone, my name is Carla McGrady. I'm a Gamilaroi woman from northern New South Wales. I'd like to welcome you to this event tonight, Future Voices, Decolonising Australian Media, brought to you by the Wheeler Centre in partnership with Our Watch. I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Meanjin and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's been 20 years since Aileen Moreton-Robinson closed out her book, Talking Up to the White Woman, with a challenge to her readers. Think about giving up power and then start doing it. Recent coverage in the media suggests that we aren't there yet when it comes to the stories we tell, which struggle to imagine to non-Indigenous audiences. And while mainstream media holds one set of tools for the cultural storytelling of the nation, First Nations women are actively carving out spaces to tell Black stories. Tonight we're going to talk about the stories that get told there, who gets to tell them, and what's at the heart of this way of telling. This evening we are joined by three eminent Indigenous women to talk about decolonisation, telling Black stories, and what this means for Australian media. Bridget Brennan is the Indigenous Affairs Editor at the ABC. Bridget has been a journalist with the ABC for a decade. She returned from London this year after a stint as Europe correspondent. She's also worked as a journalist in Hong Kong and the United States. She tells stories every day. Dr. Chelsea Watergo, formerly Bond, is a Manajali and South Sea Islander woman with over 20 years of experience working within Indigenous health as a health worker and researcher. Her new book, Another Day in the Colony, is available on pre-order now through UQP. Sanu Leone is a proud descendant of the Garawa and Bachala nations and is also proud of her Tongan and South Sea Island connections. She is the founder and CEO of Strong Women Talking here in Meanjin, Brisbane. I also want to let the audience know Rachel Hocking is here with us tonight. She's a Warlpiri woman from the Northern Territory. She is a freelance journalist, moderator and presenter who is passionate about sharing First Nations stories. Her essay, telling the story of tonight's event, will be available from the Wheeler Centre website in a few weeks' time. Chelsea, I might kick off with you, if that's okay. I just want to ask the question, how do you see yourself in this space in, I guess, feminism in this country, in the colony known as Australia? And how do you speak to that?
As a sovereign Black woman in the Academy, I'm a beneficiary of the intellectual labour of the distinguished Professor Moreton-Robinson and that book, Talking Up to the White Woman. It has done so many things, and it's a book that I return to, and it sits alongside the work of Auntie Jackie Huggins, Dr. Jackie Huggins with Sister Girl, and the work of Professor Larissa Barrett. I'm a beneficiary of that work in terms of having a language to describe the violence that we are subject to every day, even in these supposed learned places. It's given me a language to understand the world I occupy, and it's also helped me think about strategy in terms of who I talk to. What Talking Up has shown is that it doesn't matter how sophisticated you're theorising about the violence that we are subject to, is white women have never relinquished the power and the violence that they subject us to some 20 years on. And so what it's also done is remind me of the futility of talking to white women, because simply they can't be told. And so much of my work has focused on talking to mob, talking to the souls of Black fellas, and thinking about what we need to hear. I know the impact of Talking Up to the White Woman has been what it's done for Black women, not how it's changed the ways of white women. And so, I'm inspired by the work of Talking Up, and my work is informed by that. But yeah, I find great joy in speaking directly to mob in a language that is that we understand. And in a way that gets us thinking about not just how we describe the bruises on our bodies, but how we transform the social world that we occupy, and speak openly about the war that is being waged here, and the ongoing war that we're all a part of in terms of exercising our sovereignty as First Nations peoples.
Thanks, Chelsea. Bridget, I might throw to you just to, I guess, speak to that same point. Given that you're a journalist and your job is writing stories, telling stories, sharing stories, I guess helping the stories of Aboriginal people reach the broader nation, but also they really reflect and give dignity and respect to the people who you're writing about. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences and understanding that?
Yeah, I think for a long time we've been very othered. Our people have been very othered. We've been seen through a lens as though we're kind of over there on the other side of the street. And obviously as a Black journalist, that's not how we tell stories. And I think in the last decade, there's been an emergence of a real pushback against that kind of way of telling stories, particularly about our people. And you know, I work with so many amazing First Nations journalists, and we support one another wherever we are. You know, if it's at a competitor, a so-called competitor media organisation, or if it's Black journalism, if it's grassroots journalism, if it's within mainstream media, we have a wonderful collective now of Black journalists, often really young people coming through, telling stories about their own mobs on their own country, telling really difficult stories. It's very, very challenging work to be, trying to elevate our stories is one thing, but also the trauma that comes with telling our stories when those stories have a really personal impact on us. Every single story, I've always said, every single Black story I tell has something within me that it touches. And so I think there is power in that collective that's forming. I think we're at a really exciting time for Black journalism. And I think we've seen the difference. I've noticed that there's more freedom now with the way that we're telling stories, and we're actually thinking about our Black audience rather than thinking about us as this othered species over there. So naturally for me, when I'm writing a story about someone or telling their story, it's them that they are at the heart of the story, rather than thinking about the audience so much. I mean, of course, I want everyone to be reading my stories, but if it doesn't mean something to a Black audience, then for me, it's meaningless.
Yeah, very good point. It's been great to watch. I think that development that you talk about, where we are making the decision to speak to a Black audience in the work that we do. And Chelsea, you alluded to that too in your response as well. Sono, I'll bring you in here as the CEO and founder of the organisation Strong Women Talking. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see, what stories you see, the women that you see who come to you, who are involved in your organisation and the work that you do? I guess not just from that survivor advocate point of view, where often Aboriginal women are always kind of pigeonholed as victims or, labelled in certain ways by the systems that we interact with. But the strength of the women that you see on a day-to-day basis in the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carla. And yeah, definitely something that is, we consider it such an honour and a privilege to be able to be here with our sisters every day, like walking with them during their healing journey, and seeing the strength of our sisters to come into this space and actually want to even start the process of healing when they've come out of violent relationships, and their strength not only from that intimate partner or intimate violent relationships within their domestic situations, but also seeing the system and how the systems impact them, and their strength to be able to stand up against these systems like child safety, like the criminal justice system, community corrections, like it's amazing, like, to see the strength of our women and the beautiful strength of our elders and aunties that come in and yarn and sit with and walk with our women. Like, it's something beautiful to see, and yeah, so it's an honour, really.
Thanks, Sono. Just sort of drawing on that, how important do you think it is? And I guess this is a question for all of you when we're talking about, predominantly the stories of Black women, both historically and in the present day. How important is it for us as Black women to have other strong Black women beside us in these conversations, but to also draw strength from and to stand beside, I guess, us in the ongoing fight that we have on a day-to-day basis here. I'll start with you, Chelsea, in responding to that one.
Yeah, look, it's so important. I think people don't understand, to speak truth to power, as Aboriginal women, we supposedly speak from a place of powerlessness in terms of being both woman and Black. Yet at the same time, we know that's where our power comes from in our being. But to speak truth to power from that place where we're not meant to speak, where we're not meant to speak to authority, it is so important to have others that who may not be there in those moments when we are speaking, because we find ourselves often the lone voice. It is the wild Black woman in a meeting room, in a lecture theatre, in a tute room, in the newsroom, that often is the only one that has the courage to speak up. And so we can find ourselves very alone in those times, and to have the sisterhood around us, and particularly aunties and older people, to check in with, to remind us that we're not crazy, that our anger is justified, that our fire is necessary, and that also our pain is also okay in the midst of this, that we can be vulnerable and strong at the same time. And it's the sisterhood that allows us to do that behind closed doors, when we've got to have a public face that says we're fierce and strong and unrelenting. And so I've been blessed with so many strong women beside me who have made their kitchen table available to me to talk and to be vulnerable and angry and funny and wild and all those kinds of things that we need to be, so that we can get up the next day and fight again. But I think people don't realise it has a toll on the body. It takes a toll on our families. There's a price that we pay for this, and it's again the sisterhood that picks up that price, who we get to call on to help us through that, even knowing that we're all going through the same thing at the same time. But yeah, I think I remember being in this forum, and there were senior people there, and it was an Indigenous kind of group, and I was one of a few women there, and I remember a prominent Aboriginal man describing me to someone as being radical. And I was there as a scholar, and it made me a bit wild, because he was trying to locate me as this kind of irrational, unreasonable woman, when in fact my scholarship is informed. It's quite reasonable and rational. And so you just see how when we speak truth to power, we're cast in this particular light, as if there's something wrong with us, that we're a threat, that we're the problem, and not the social world that continually demonises us and brutalises us every day. So sometimes our brothers are not in solidarity with us when it counts. And we see them instead standing in solidarity with white women and white men, and that's the betrayal. So I'm grateful that I've got the sisterhood to stand with me, or the titterhood, as Auntie Jackie Huggins, Dr. Jackie Huggins would describe it.
Yes, beware the Black man in a suit. Someone deadly once said that, I think. So no, just on that topic around, what Chelsea just responded to, just want to give you an opportunity to speak to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it just comes back to it's us as Black women, it's our kinship way, it's our way of being, of existing as Black women. Like, we can't do it without our aunties, without our, in our language, Bachelor language, we say nabang, which is mother. We have, my mum had 7 sisters, there's seven of them. So I had 7 mothers growing up. And then that doesn't include mum's cousins who are like my mothers too. And that's just that way of existing. It's our in our DNA. It's in our kinship systems. We need it. Just like, and it's the total strength. When Chelsea was saying that, she's grateful for the kitchen tables. Absolutely, I could not have even the amount of times I wanted to give up starting Strong Women Talking, but meeting with aunties that would just continually encourage, no, bub, you just keep going. You can do it, bub. Like, because it is daunting when you're up against the system and you start to realise, oh my gosh, this is what I'm up against out here. This is what it's going to take to be uniquely Strong Women Talking, uniquely an Aboriginal woman in this space, trying to start something up, a healing space for our sisters to have a voice and our aunties to have that voice. So, yeah, we hope that that's what we're creating here at Strong Women Talking, Marigura Mobiyangu in our language, to empower and help to give that, like you think about when a woman comes through violence in that relationship, she's sometimes can be very isolated from family, number one, a big part of emotional abuse, social abuse, and she's intimidated and she's lost a lot of those connections. So just having this space where our sisters can come and connect, and we can do that. And we have aunties here. We're so blessed to have aunties here that are on staff here as our resident and elders and admin, aunties that the women just relate to, other Black older mothers, nabungs. So, yeah, we couldn't do it we couldn't survive. It's impossible.
Thanks, Sano. Pridge, I'll let you have a turn and just talk about not only, I guess, what that means for you personally as a Koori woman, but the influence and impact that has then on your writing and the stories that you tell and how you advocate, I guess, for the stories of Aboriginal people in the media, in the spaces that you work.
Well, when we started the Black Indigenous Affairs unit that we've got at the ABC now within ABC News nearly 4 or 5 years ago, we had 2 Aboriginal women working and a Torres Strait Islander woman working on that unit, and I've always called it the little black unit that could. And actually, since we've started it, we've had 7 or 8, I think, only women so far coming to work. We've got nothing against the fellas, but it's been so far run and led by Black women, and I'm super, super proud of that because, just nodding my head off at Chelsea before talking about the impact on our bodies and the impact of that fight. You can have a really successful day, or you can have a story that does really well, but in reality, behind the curtain, it's actually it's been deeply painful to produce, and there's been a lot of fight within organisations to get our stories up there and in the top spot, and a lot of attitudes that we have to fight against as well. So it's never easy, even on positive stories. Every story is a slog for a range of reasons, and every story is really, really personal. So to actually look across at another Aboriginal woman and they know exactly how you feel without you even having to say something, like you see the look on their face when they come down to sit at their desk. it's been a bit harder, the isolation with COVID. We haven't been able to be amongst other blackfellas, and that's been really challenging. But there is that care and love and support, particularly for our young women in the industry. I want to make sure they're supported, and they know that I'm always a phone call away if they want to just have a yarn about how that felt, because we all have those experiences. And it's interesting actually going to interview Aboriginal women in our jobs who may well be facing the same thing in other industries, and it's spooky because it doesn't matter where they're working. It's the same stories of sexism, racism that we all come up against, and the intersection of that. I think when it comes to doing our stories, we're very mindful, I think, as Aboriginal women and as feminists, that where are the women going to be centred in this story? A lot of stories are very blokey. A lot of communities put men forward to be the spokesperson, and we know that the issues affect women in a different way. So we've tried really hard to make sure that women are centred in our stories. And it's not just a story about housing. It's, we've all heard that story before done the same way. It's actually, for us, it's about, here's a single mum who gets up in the middle of the night to mop the sewage, the raw sewage seeping into her house so that she can have a clean house in the morning for her kids. That's the story I want to tell. And that's her strength. That's her resilience. That's her fight. It's not her vulnerability. That is her story that we should be telling and centering, rather than kind of having women in the background and not really highlighted in the stories. That's what I think we've done really poorly in the past, and that's something that we've really tried to change in the approach that we have in our unit. And sometimes that takes longer. Sometimes that means going, well, no, the story won't be ready till this woman's ready to speak, till we've had time with her, till she feels safe with us. And that's a different mentality in the news, because always it's been the deadline comes first. And to me now, no, it's our people come first when they're ready and they're comfortable with how the story will be told.
Yeah, that's a really, really important statement, I think, because it's always, whether it's around funding or deadlines or, the news cycle and things like that, the pressure is always on to deliver in the way that somebody else wants you to deliver, whether it be a story or yourself even. In these spaces, there are these expectations around what it is that Aboriginal women are supposed to be, or what Aboriginal women are not supposed to be. I guess more importantly, it's where we are visible and not visible in certain spaces, and who actually gets to tell the stories, who gets given that space, who gets given entry into that room, and to build that narrative. Chelsea, I might let you speak a little bit more around this topic. I know the institute you've just started is about making your own space, and being able to speak the way you want to.
I can't think of anything I've written where it hasn't been contested, typically by a white editor. And I've got several publications which were, despite going through peer review, were rejected. And the one more recently was the Australian Feminist Law Journal special issue of Indigenous women's writing about race in the academy. And ironically, they decided it was would be defamatory to publish my critique of a book written by a white woman, which had 184 footnotes identifying the racialising logics in her text. But apparently you can't even imply that a white woman is racist in the Australian Feminist Law Journal. Funnily enough, that article is publishable and will be in my forthcoming book. But it goes to show the way in which white women stand in solidarity with each other, despite an open invitation for a black woman to speak on this subject matter. And I should acknowledge Drs. Nicole Watson and Alison Whittaker, who were the special issue editors who fought for the right to tell my story, and in the absence of that got me a front cover on that journal to remind them whose land they were standing on. So the solidarity, the sisterhood during that time was so very important. I think why I get in trouble sometimes is I was raised by a black father who insisted that I never bow my head. And each morning at the kitchen table, we would argue over the Courier Mail stories. And it was expected that I hold my own, because when I left the front door, I would have to hold my own. I was also raised by a white mother, and I forgot that I can't behave like the indignant white woman that she is. And so I often forget my place. I think that's what gets me into trouble, but also at the same time, which makes the work do what it does, because I forget to or refuse to know my place when it comes to speaking. And that's not in a disrespectful way in terms of culturally, because I know how to behave in that regard, but in terms of knowing my place culturally, but refusing to know my place politically. And I think, that's the sovereign black woman, is that refusal to subscribe to the lies that they insist we tell. And so what we have as black women storytellers, whether it's in the academy, whether it's in the service sector, whether it's in the newsroom, is this, on the one hand, we get cast in particular characters that we're allowed to be. And so, we're allowed to tell the misery memoir. We're allowed to speak of trauma so long as the perpetrator is a black perpetrator. We can't speak as black victims around state-sanctioned violence because we can't show the way in which the state itself is a perpetrator. And I've had all kinds of resistance in regards to that, from expert reports to colonial inquiries to commissioned reports to the Queensland Sentencing Advisory Council, which they didn't want to publish. The more, black women speak truth to power, the more violence we get subjected to, because they want us they cast us in a certain way, but also decide what the narrative can be before we've even put pen to paper. And so we're always engaged in this storytelling war as sovereign black women. And that's the beauty of, black women's work. I think of the likes of Amy Maguire and just this refusal to tell the story that mainstream media tells. And she just publishes her own work on Substack and just does it anyway. This is what sovereignty is. It's that refusal to operate in the parameters that they provided for us, and we're just going to do it anyway on our terms. And that's where the innovation is. That's where the excellence is. It's actually at the margins of colonial institutions that black excellence resides. And we've got to make sure that those that are coming behind don't see the black space as this kind of ghettoized space of inferior scholarship or substandard service provision or not quite, proper journalism. It's precisely in these places where excellence lives, where the best, ethics, models of best practice. That's the beautiful place. And so that's the thing that excites me, is in the midst of the overwhelming injustice of everything is the fierceness of black resistance in not tearing down, but building whole new ways of being and new ways of doing business. And while being pathologized as being some kind of substandard place that we live in because we can't make it in the mainstream.
It's that accountability piece, isn't it, in there, in those black spaces, that is, the same but different, I guess, to other mainstream spaces, because we're not only accountable to audiences, we're accountable to our people, to our mob, to, the people that we write about and write for, and who we do this work for. It's that, that level of black accountability, I think, that makes it so much more, excellent in all of the work that we do.
One of my, I was very fortunate to have Dr. Little Watson read my book when I first wrote it, and she growled me a little bit, and I talked about survival a lot, and about us being survivors, and she growled me and said, "Chelsea, we're more than that." And I was really like, wow, I've theorized survival through the whole book, and now I have to revisit that. But it was such a gift that she would take the time to read the book and to gift me with the critique to make it better. And, a lot of times as black women, we give critique. People ask us our opinion of things, And I naively give it thinking that people actually want your critique, but what they're seeking from Black women is a role of service to validate what they're doing. And if you dare tell the truth that maybe there's some limitations to it, you get yourself in trouble, even though they asked for it. So I often get myself in trouble when I give honest appraisal of things, because it's assumed that I can't be a knower, and that I'm here to validate other people's work. But I see the critique from Black women as such a gift, because we know we don't have a lot of time on our hands for that free labour. But to tell someone the truth about their work is such a gift of love. And I am so grateful that of the feedback I received. I was scared, and I was really frightened. And it took me a while to go back to get all of the critique, because I was still frightened. But so grateful for the gift of that critique to make the work better. It's not an attack. It's because we're all trying to help each other sharpen each other's tools, because this war is so violent. And we need the best tools possible. And it's only from Black communities that we get that. Sadly, we're in an era where anytime a Black fella offers critique to another Black fella, we're accused of lateral violence. You know, to pathologise the intellectual work of Black people as being only ever violent and not an act of love and generosity. That's what we're battling with as well, of recognising the acts of love in the midst of the labour and all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. We get stuck with the labels that others want to put on us, especially as Black women. And I know, Sono, you see that a lot in the work that you do, standing beside Black women who, labelled it in, any number of different ways, none of them positive. When you're there in the room sitting beside them and essentially, holding that mirror up to those systems, with your sisters, with the women that you're sitting there with.
Absolutely. And I think just touching on what Chelsea was saying, like, that's our way. That is the Aboriginal way. That's our way. I wouldn't be where I was here without getting that growling from aunties. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And sometimes we need that hard yarn. We need that straight talk, real talk from the aunties to put us in that direction, to keep us empowered, to keep us strong, to keep us going. And it's such a beautiful thing for us to embrace, and we do embrace it as Black women. But yeah, definitely putting the mirror up to those systems. Like, it's really hard, because we might get referrals in from different agencies, and it'll be like, okay, we're getting a referral in from child safety, and then all of a sudden we're meeting with child safety, and then it's like, okay, these are the things that are oppressive to this woman, A, B, C, D, for her healing. And it's like they just totally freak out and can get really defensive when you start to show them what's impacting them getting their children back, because their lens is so focused on bringing this mother, that they can't seem to see the strength in this woman and how we see her as a Black in our space through our lens. We see the strong mother. We see all the strengths. We see all these different qualities and characteristics that this mum's thriving, So yeah, it's good to be in this space to just try and bring that awareness. I know last year Our Watch supported us and we had the Open Thinking Conference, and it was deadly. We got to have aunties that are just on the ground come and share and vocalise and give a platform to the voice of what's happening and how the systems are treating our women and how they've been impacted by the system, whether it's professionally or personally. And, as you know, like, I don't know if you've seen any of the evaluation that I've been doing with some of the other crew from Our Watch, but it's been deadly to see the impact that had just by sharing stories and just letting them see, here, we have our own governance systems. Here, don't tell us that we don't know. ways of being and doing. We have these things in our families. We are strong families. Like, I'm sure it just flipped the lid on. That's why I call it open thinking in our language, Wamba Barangaman. Like, you mob, like, stop looking at it through your lens and see it through our way. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a powerful conference to be a part of, and just to see, you know, the women who are in the boots on the ground doing this labour day in and day out, who have to fight constantly with these systems that, you know, just don't want to see things any other way. And Aileen Moreton-Robinson talks about that in the book, in that there are white women who just, there's only one way that they see things. And, you know, it's through the gaze of the white woman. And that's their point of reference, because they are the centre of their worlds and their universe. And to even remove themselves from the centre of the stage and from the centre of the story, and to actually see things, you know, from a different perspective that doesn't revolve around them as white women in this world, is an eye-opening thing. And, you know, the fact that it's 2021 and we're still here and still having to say that out loud, I think speaks to the magnitude of the issue itself. I'll let you continue, Sono.
Just quickly, just on that, you know, I was in a child safety meeting last year, and I had sitting with our sister girl, advocating with her. It might have been 2 years ago, and I had the child safety officer actually giving her personal view of being a mum in that table, at that table. That's what she did. She said, but when I get home, I'm a mother, and this is the thing. This is exactly what you're saying. It's not just she's using the system, but then I said, hey, don't you dare. Don't you dare come on this table. This is about this woman right here. This has nothing to do with your personal. Don't you ever use your personal parenting, or like, hello, that woman gets to go home to her children every night. She, you know, yet she will look and label this sister for getting angry because of the removal of her children, you know. And these are the issues that we see our sisters come into this beautiful space of healing, and they're so encouraged. And then it could take one meeting like that just to change it all, and then sister girl feels down again, downtrodden from the system, the oppression. But yeah, I just wanted to share that as an example.
Bridget, you wanted to share?
Yeah, I don't think our industry has done a great job in terms of the way that we've framed Aboriginal women. I mean, if you look at historically how Aboriginal women have been seen through the media, it's helpless, it's hopeless, it's diminutive, it's quiet. You know, that's not the Aboriginal women I know. And I just remember I did this really powerful story with the ladies from the Tunganjira town camps. Just the most incredible, you know, generous, insightful, strong women. They are just incredible. And they had to, in 2017, they had to march down the main street in Alice Springs, organise a march so that they could get the media to start reporting their women, the deaths of their women, in a proper way. To actually humanise them, memorialise them, celebrate them, actually write about these mothers who had died. Not just, you know, some 3-line paragraph in the back page of the local paper. So I just thought the irony of that, to get some media attention, they marched down the main street. And when I did the story with them, someone I know said to me, gee, that story was really powerful. Like, it's just so hard to get Aboriginal women to talk about these issues. And that made me so angry, because I was like, well, no, actually it's not. They just haven't been given the microphone. There's a difference. There's a difference between being voiceless and not having the amplification, you know. And you go there and do the work, do the time, spend the time with women, you know. Tell their story from their point of view. don't just put overlay of women walking down the street and talk about them. Like it's like what I was saying before about that view of us being over there. It just made me so devastated to hear that that's what people think, that we don't have a voice. And I think, wherever I go, it just really rams home that Aboriginal women have so many roles, so many protective roles. It's not just their day job. It's, all day, every day for so many Aboriginal women, particularly in education and different fields like that. Some of the women I've met who they don't switch off, at the end of the day at a childcare centre that night, then they're checking on all the families. They're the front line, getting paid next to nothing. And those are the stories we so rarely hear about that strength.
Yeah, that's a really powerful thing you said about the difference between being voiceless and not being given amplification. Chels, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, there is an active silencing. It's of black women whose stories don't centre white virtue and white benevolence. Like if this is constructed, it's maintained. It's just like, so if our stories don't talk about the hero at the end of the day being a white woman, a white institution, then they don't get told, and they're refused, like actively refused. This is the violence of the colony. It's not that they can't find us or they haven't got relationships with us or they just didn't know. This idea of black absence is a lie that they've tried to sustain for over 200 years. But I mean, I just think of the black fellas that were down the Gold Coast on the Sunrise set with banners. I think of black fellas who are in Sydney, I think outside Sunrise as well, and they closed the curtains. There is an active silencing of sovereign black stories in this country. And typically the most fiercest, most sovereign stories are those told by black women, and black women who aren't just fighting for feminist agendas. It's black women fighting to get our kids back. It's black women fighting for men who have died in custody, for the demonisation of our men in cartoons. Like, black women are fighting for our whole community. We're not just fighting for our own causes. And yet it's the black woman who is most brutalised in the course of this. So I think part of this is about, and what I've tried to do is reveal the ways in which there's this active silencing. The number of defamation threats I've had come to me and my workplace for telling the truth about my child's capabilities in response to misrepresentation of him by Education Queensland. I had the legal threat, not the white woman or white passing woman who told that story, not the education department, but me to my workplace. Like, I can't even defend my child's intelligence and my parenting capabilities without an attack on my workplace for that. This place is violent, and the number of active resistance to allow us to tell the truth. I still remember the Bill Leaks conversation piece where I had to argue with a white woman editor about not including a sentence that some Indigenous men abuse their children. And the reason why I had to defend that is it had a really intimate photo of my husband and one of our children. And I did not want to attach that label to them because it's already attached to his body. And this piece was about separating that out and was very instrumental in the Indigenous Dads hashtag to reimagine black fathers. But imagine had I not fought for that and we kept in that line that some Indigenous dads do abuse their kids. Like, these fights are all the time and everywhere, like just defending your humanity, our own humanity, and in the course of telling the truth about our existence. Like, this place is really bad. It's really violent.
Yeah, and there's a it's one line, two lines in an article, but it doesn't speak to the effort and the pain and the actual size of the battle that you have to fight for that thing that seems so small but has so much meaning and is so important in the way that not just us as women, but our communities and our men in particular are spoken about when it comes to this issue of violence. And, you know, that thing too that I think you've all sort of spoken about and made mention to, that we're fighting often in all of these different spaces white women for these things, when, you know, the line that often gets thrown back at us as black women is that, you know, why are we, you know, picking apart all of these other things? Shouldn't we all just be standing in solidarity as women? And it's like, well, you know, the shoe's on the other foot right now, and that's not what happens. Where our stories, you know, our lives, our injuries, our trauma are co-opted into the space of the white feminist more often than not, in order to, you know, have them be able to further their causes. And I guess, you know, one thing that kind of speaks to that quite well, and has been in the media recently, is this issue around coercive control. And the fact that black women who've spoken out against that, or even spoken about, you know, the carceral response not being the best one in this situation, and who would bear the brunt of that, being Aboriginal women, you know, being accused of being wild black women, being angry and, you know, not being prepared to come and sit at the table and have the conversation, when we've been having the conversation. The conversation's been had, and the statement has been made that this is not for us, this is for you, and we won't allow our stories to be co-opted in that way for you to push a narrative that we will be punished for. Sono? You wanted to say something?
I was just going to say, you know, and we do get screened, and we are. Like, I know I was rung up and interviewed, but obviously what I said did not fit the narrative. So it did not make, I did not get any screen time, any airtime, or any further, didn't even make the cut, because I don't know if it was too foreign, they didn't understand what I was saying, or they just knew what I was saying and they just, you know, but yeah, I did, around that coercive control piece. So it's, exactly what you're saying.
Those who did participate in the conversation on social media, who publicly critiqued the intellectual work that was supposedly informing, you know, some of the discussion around female-only police stations and the criminalisation of coercive control in other countries, and proving intellectually the limitations of that evidence base that was being used to push it here. We found black female academics weren't even able to do their job as academics and critique scholarly work, which is kind of our day job. You know, so there was an active resistance, you know, from the exclusion of voices that were different to a demonisation of those that that questioned the authority from which these people speak from. And the biggest, like, the irony of all of this was that one of the stories used in that documentary around coercive control, it featured the story of an Aboriginal woman who was misidentified as a perpetrator, who tragically lost her baby as a result of what the police's conduct in not protecting her or her baby. Yet, so they used the trauma, which told the story of the violence of a carceral response to family violence. So it didn't even align. So the trauma was used, but yet the evidence from that trauma was that this is not the best response. And yet still they were able to use her story in that way. You know, that's violent. And it's so deeply distressing and wrong. Like, and all of these, during this time, so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women were sharing openly about the violence of police in the midst of them seeking help around family violence. And to ignore all of those stories, yet at the same time in the media push out this line that Aboriginal women are silent about violence they experience. There's these constant disjunctures between what's actually going on and how we're spoken about. And if we dare challenge that, then there's something wrong with us. that we're the threat, that now we're the perpetrators. And white women are the ones that are perpetuating this. So it's this, white women are talking about coercive control, but that's the relationship that we find ourselves in with white women.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bridget, did you want to comment on that issue specifically around, the debate in the media on coercive control?
I think we see with a number of pieces of legislation or public policy debates or conversations, typically you'll see, you might be reading a news piece and you'll get through 20 paragraphs, and then at the end there's like a cursory mention of, oh, by the way, Aboriginal people say this will be completely inappropriate for them for a number of reasons. You see that so many times. It's kind of like we're always up the back of the bus. They're like, oh, and by the way, the black people don't want this. And I think that is quite damaging. I think even in COVID, I think we've seen an absence of discussion around health policy, about how it will affect blackfellas, about how health messaging has worked for Aboriginal people. Instead, we've just heard that we're all hesitant, that none of us want to get vaccinated. I think there has been, just in so many different policy areas. I think it's a real shame, a shame on the nation actually, that we don't first look at how this will affect the First Peoples. Instead, it's always up the back, and I think that has a really, really, damaging effect in a lot of different areas.
And it's that victim blaming narrative too, isn't it? And even in the health space, it's like, oh well, you're in the first rollout, particularly for the vaccine, and it's our own fault because we're hesitant as to why our mobs aren't getting vaccinated, So it's always that blame shifting back onto us, whether it be in the health spaces or whether it's talking about violence, what did you do to deserve that, or, the provocation and things like that, to the point where, if we're not the ones being victim blamed, then we're being accused of being perpetrators in almost the same breath. So, no, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I was just going back to what the question before and what Chelsea was saying about this space, but it is really hard being in the DV space, and it's this, like, societal DV services are all based around white feminism. And when you come and you have this different lens, it's like you're almost looked at like, oh my gosh, what is this? What is she talking about? What? I don't get that, because it's so singular. And when we look at, it's like just so foreign to think about the different intersections that we have to face around, just for one sister that comes into this space for healing, the amount of different racist structures she has to face just blows my mind. And not just one, but that's every sister, that's myself, that's all the aunties that we work with. We've all been through that. We live it. You have to then go out and live it and breathe it, like Chelsea was saying with the education system. It's challenging. It's continually changing. And being a Black DV service in this space and a healing coming from our cultural lens, through a blackfella lens, through a healing space of how we do, like it doesn't fit into any particular, it doesn't fit that model, that white framework. It doesn't fit the federal funding model. It doesn't fit the state federal model. And then you get that oppressive thing of these big organisations getting funding, and then they'll want to tick that black box, and they'll ring you to be their token little black agency to fulfill, so that they can still get those millions of dollars of funding in, and yet pay us maybe a couple of grand for, that can't even, like, it's just crazy just being in it. It's really sad. Yeah.
If I can add, I just think about when Moreton-Robinson talks about the subject position of middle-class white women being a site of dominance. In the social services sector, family violence sector, it's white women's mortgages that are getting paid here. So the sector is dominated by white women. Why would they change things? This is not just about sustaining the virtue of white women, it's that it's economically in their favour to maintain dominance in this space. And it has an historical tradition. It was white women that have taken our kids. It's the nurses, the social workers who exercise the violence, not just the police. White women have long been a beneficiary of the dispossession of Aboriginal people, including specifically the racialised and gendered violence that Aboriginal women have been subject to, and their refusal to stop. It's been unrelenting, and we see it. The dominance of white women in the social services sector in deciding which black mother gets to keep her kids. The white female teacher in the school who decides to report that black family. The white nurse at the primary healthcare centre who does a notification because someone missed a medical appointment. It's all white women. They're not just stopped keeping us out of journals. Every day, in almost every aspect of our life is being controlled by white women. And we saw it in the Coercive Control conversation. A white journo selling her book and her documentary got to exclude black women. And that was violent for so many black women, that conversation. Now she's suddenly talking about the need to centre our voices after her documentary went to air, after her book got published. It's outrageous.
Yeah, they're brought into the conversation, after it's finished, essentially. Absolutely. Bridget, I'll throw to you.
I just wanted to quickly say, despite all of the hurdles that hit us in the face, every day you see black women innovating, organising, just doing the work, I'll never forget this story of this most incredible black woman running an early education centre in regional Victoria. I did a doco with her. And, she was telling me the story of how her work just doesn't stop. It's 24 hours a day. So she had this mum who unfortunately had her arm broken in a DV incident. She was up at the hospital. So this woman quickly got in the car, went to the hospital just to make sure the kids weren't taken away, to get there before the police got there, to make sure the kids had a feed, to take them, put them in her house for that week, making sure the woman was okay, checking on her, letting all the family know, all those different things that she has to do outside of her job. It's on the front line, but it's overtime, and it's all because of the love that we have for one another. So I just think, that's a testament to our strength as well. It's just so amazing to see in every state and territory around the country.
Carla, I think that's a testament of us. We operate from that place of love and passion, and that's the difference.
100%. Now, I could sit here and yarn to you all day long, but I think our time is almost just about up. So I might just come back to you for some final comments just to wrap up. Sono?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any sisters out there that are watching. You're deadly, black, beautiful, keep being unique, keep being you. Don't let anyone silence you or feel that you don't have a voice. If you're in Meanjin in Brisbane, look us up, strongwomentalking.org.au, and feel free to come down and have a cuppa with either myself or the Arnies.
Deadly. Thank you, sis. Bridget?
I just wanted to say, if anyone's listening and is, inspired to get involved in the media, we need you. We need more blackfellas in this space, and there is now a growing collective, and we need to support their work. For all non-Indigenous people, if you're thinking about how you can support the work of Aboriginal people, please amplify the voices that already exist in the media, because it's a really, really tough job. And I see it as carrying on the work of our ancestors and the people in this industry and the many industries that have come before us. We're just carrying on that work, and that's what keeps me going every day.
Totally, and thank you for all the work that you do. Final statements, Dr. Chelsea.
I just want to finish on, I guess, love, because we started to talk about that towards the end. And I remember Dr. Crystal McKinnon shared with me a page out of Sister Girl a little while ago. And there was a conversation Bell Hooks was having with Jackie Huggins in that. And Hooks was talking about love not as something romantic and sentimental, though we know it to be, but love as a political force. And she spoke about how she loves Black people, and that Black people love her back because they feel the love in her work. Too often in the colony, as Black women, we are being deemed unloving and unlovable. And so I guess I just want to remind us all that we are the most loving and the most lovable as sovereign Black women, because our love is a selfless love. It's a love that extends beyond our own immediate needs to that of our community, that of our ancestors, and that of those who are to follow us. And so in amongst the rage and the anger that drives what we have to do, we have to never forget the place in which it comes from, and that is love, an emotion they deemed us not worthy of, but we know ourselves to be worthy of.
That sounds like the absolutely perfect note to wrap up on. Can I just say it's been an incredible honour to sit and yarn with the three of you. I'm very grateful for your wisdom, your strength, and your love, and for the work that you do, for our mob and the ways that you represent strong, deadly Black women. So thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and around the world.